Hello everyone, welcome. It's fascinating to think about lives so distant from our own, yet strangely similar in many ways. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to wake up before the sun rises, to feel the cold mist of the morning brushing your face as you step onto the soil you will spend every day tending? Imagine yourself in the vast expanse of the Roman Empire, perhaps somewhere in the rolling hills of Campania or the fertile plains of Gaul, where the rhythm of life is dictated by seasons, by the sun, and by the needs of the land. Picture a farmer, a colonist, as they are called, stretching their tired limbs as the first light breaks over the horizon, ready to begin a day that will be long, repetitive, yet filled with subtle moments that reveal the extraordinary within the ordinary. But before we get too deep into the fields and the chores, I am curious, where are you listening from right now? And what hour is it where you are? It's always intriguing to consider the different corners of the world where this story is drifting, reaching ears and minds far removed from the very land we're about to explore. The life of a farmer in Roman times was more complex than it might appear at first glance. While the wealthy elite, patricians and senators, dined on olives, honeyed wine, and imported delicacies from across the Mediterranean, the average farmer lived a life that was dictated by necessity, by survival, and by the relentless cycles of planting, tending, and harvesting. Their diet was simple but resourceful. Grains like wheat and barley formed the foundation of every meal, often ground into coarse bread or porridge. Vegetables grown in small plots, cabbages, onions, leeks, and lentils added essential variety and nutrition, while legumes and beans were both a source of sustenance and a natural way to enrich the soil for the next season's crops. Occasionally, a farmer might be able to taste meat, perhaps a small portion of pork or chicken, but such luxury was rare, reserved for festivals or moments when livestock breeding allowed for a sacrifice without compromising the future of the household. Every morning, long before the city streets began to hum with merchants and citizens, the farmer would begin with inspection. They would walk the rows of crops, noticing the slightest signs of disease or infestation, tracking the way sunlight fell across the fields, and feeling the texture of the soil through calloused hands. Tools were simple: wooden plows, often pulled by oxen, sickles for reaping, and baskets for gathering. Yet the precision with which they were used mattered greatly, for every seed planted, every furrow drawn, had consequences that would ripple through the household and perhaps even into the wider community. Imagine the patience required, the intimate understanding of nature, the negotiation between human effort and natural forces, between rain and drought, between pests and crops. Farmers were, in many ways, unsung scientists, experimenting with rotation, understanding which grains fared better under certain conditions, and which herbs could protect the harvest without the need for mystical intervention. But life was not solely work. In the evenings, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the long hours of labor had concluded, families would gather. Fires were lit in small hearths, and meals were shared with a sense of both gratitude and pragmatism. Bread, dipped in olive oil, perhaps flavored with herbs gathered from nearby hillsides, would be accompanied by vegetables or occasionally fish from a nearby river. Wine, though often watered down, was a constant companion, and conversation, though quieter than in the bustling forums of the cities, filled the rooms with stories, laughter, and sometimes disputes over minor details of household management. Children played near the fire, learning the tools of labor from an early age, while elders passed down wisdom about planting seasons, weather predictions, and the subtle signs that foretold a good harvest or the risk of famine. The line between work and life, between survival and culture, was blurred, and yet it created a rhythm that was steady, predictable, and, in its own way, comforting. Social life for farmers was also structured around necessity and opportunity. Festivals punctuated the calendar, moments where the hard monotony of labor was replaced by music, dancing, and offerings to the gods who were believed to oversee every aspect of agricultural success. Saturnalia, for instance, or local harvest festivals, were occasions when the community gathered, when stories were exchanged, and when the boundaries between rich and poor could momentarily soften. Even in these celebrations, however, the presence of work was never fully absent. Offerings had to be prepared, feasts organized, and livestock managed. Yet in the shared laughter, the singing, and the games that often accompanied these gatherings, one can detect the resilient spirit of those who, though bound by the soil, found joy in fleeting freedom, in brief escapes from the relentless demands of existence. Interestingly, the Roman Empire was vast, and farming practices were far from uniform. In the south, olives and grapes dominated the landscape, and the work of the farmer involved a delicate understanding of irrigation, pruning, and the timing of harvest to ensure that the oils and wines produced would meet both household needs and market expectations. In northern provinces, the focus shifted to grains, cattle, and hardy vegetables that could survive colder climates. Markets in towns and cities created a connection between farmers and the larger economy, as surplus crops were exchanged for goods that could not be produced locally, tools, clothing, and spices, perhaps even news from distant lands that painted vivid pictures of life beyond the fields. The farmer, though physically tied to the land, was in many ways a participant in a much larger system, a cog in a wheel that extended from the quiet hills to the bustling streets of Rome itself. Even within the household, the roles were carefully delineated. Men might oversee plowing, tending, and negotiation with traders, while women prepared food, preserved produce, and managed smaller plots or gardens. Children contributed as soon as they were able, learning by observation and by hands-on practice. Slaves, if present, added another layer of complexity, performing tasks ranging from heavy labor to skilled artisanal work, and their presence could significantly affect the prosperity of a farm. The relationships between these members were intricate, shaped by necessity, duty, and sometimes genuine affection. Every gesture, every decision, had implications for survival, and yet, within this framework of constant work, there were moments of leisure, of storytelling, of music played on simple instruments, of quiet reflection beneath the wide Roman sky. As the seasons slowly turned, each bringing its own demands and subtle transformations, the life of a Roman farmer unfolded with both rhythm and unpredictability. The spring mornings were particularly deceptive, filled with the promise of growth yet shadowed by the ever-present threat of sudden frost or heavy rains that could destroy delicate seedlings. Farmers would rise even before the first birds had fully awakened, their feet sinking into damp earth as they inspected every furrow, every sprouting seed. They had learned to read the land as if it were a living manuscript, noting the color of leaves, the subtle tilt of stalks, and the presence of insects, some beneficial, some harbingers of potential ruin. It was a life requiring both patience and acute attention, where every decision, no matter how small, could ripple through weeks or months of labor. Children, meanwhile, were not idle observers but active participants in the rhythms of the farm. They learned to carry water in wooden buckets, to feed small livestock, to gather eggs, and, in playful moments, to race along the edges of fields, imagining themselves as heroes of some grand adventure. These early lessons were essential, not only for the survival of the household but for the preservation of knowledge that had been passed down through generations. Boys and girls, though often tasked differently, absorbed the intricacies of planting schedules, the care of animals, and the seasonal rituals that guided the life of the farm. By the time they reached adolescence, they were often nearly as skilled as their parents, capable of making judgments about when to sow, when to reap, and when to protect crops from the unpredictable forces of nature. The work itself could be grueling, yet it was interspersed with moments of fascination and ingenuity. Farmers experimented with subtle adjustments to irrigation channels, observing the way water flowed across different soil types, and sometimes borrowing techniques from neighboring lands, whether through whispered conversation or more formal instruction during visits to markets and nearby villas. Oxen were trained to pull plows with care and precision, responding to cues that required both strength and intelligence. Tools were often handmade, their wooden handles carefully carved to fit the user's hands, and their blades honed until they could cut through even the toughest soil with minimal effort. Each modification, each improvement, was a small victory in the ongoing battle against the elements, pests, and the inexorable passage of time. Food, although simple, carried its own rituals and pleasures. The preparation of a meal was as much about sustenance as it was about care, creativity, and the subtle joys of flavor. Barley porridge could be sweetened with honey, sometimes combined with herbs like mint or thyme, creating a modest but satisfying blend of taste and nourishment. Bread, baked in communal ovens or small hearths, often formed the centerpiece of every meal, sometimes accompanied by legumes, root vegetables, or the occasional piece of cheese. Preservation was an art, and farmers learned to dry fruits, salt meat, and store grains carefully to ensure survival through the leaner months. Each bite was a testament to labor and foresight, a tangible reward for the long hours spent bending over soil, tending animals, and negotiating with nature itself. Leisure, too, had its place in the lives of farmers, though it often came in forms that might seem humble by modern standards. After a day of plowing or planting, families might gather to tell stories by firelight, recounting local legends, experiences of previous generations, or tales heard from traveling merchants. Music, played on simple flutes or stringed instruments, often accompanied these evenings, providing rhythm for dance or quiet reflection. Children might enact playful skirmishes with imaginary foes, using sticks as swords and crates as fortresses, while adults observed, sometimes offering guidance, sometimes joining in the laughter. There was also a kind of informal learning embedded in these moments, where historical knowledge, moral lessons, and practical wisdom were subtly conveyed, linking the rhythms of farm life to the larger tapestry of Roman culture. Community connections were vital. Farmers relied on neighbors not only for labor exchange but also for sharing news, strategies, and advice. A good season in one village could inspire hope in another, while disasters or poor harvests were often mitigated through communal cooperation. Markets were not just places of commerce but arenas of information, where techniques, seeds, and tools could be exchanged, and where stories of distant lands, military campaigns, and imperial decrees were shared, adding layers of knowledge and imagination to the otherwise grounded existence of the fields. The farmer, though physically tied to the soil, was intellectually and socially engaged in a broader network that extended far beyond the boundaries of their immediate plot of land. Interestingly, some farmers became subtle innovators, adopting techniques that might later influence entire regions. They observed the habits of animals, experimented with different seed varieties, and learned to read weather patterns in ways that might seem intuitive but were in fact the result of meticulous observation and experience. Some experimented with intercropping, planting barley alongside legumes to enrich the soil, while others carefully timed their planting to coincide with lunar cycles or local seasonal patterns. These practices, though not always documented, represented a kind of applied science, a deep understanding of the land that balanced tradition, observation, and necessity. As the day waned and the sky was painted with hues of orange and purple, farmers would often pause for a moment of quiet reflection. The vast fields, stretching toward distant hills or the edges of forests, held both promise and uncertainty. Smoke from nearby hearths mingled with the evening air, carrying the scent of bread, herbs, and roasted vegetables, while the distant sound of livestock settling in for the night added to the tapestry of rural life. In these moments, one could sense the quiet resilience of human beings, their capacity to adapt, endure, and find meaning within constraints that might appear harsh or unyielding to an outsider. Spring gradually gave way to the sweltering heat of summer, and the Roman countryside transformed under the persistent sun, painting the fields in deep, rich hues of green and gold. For the farmer, these months were perhaps the most demanding, requiring constant vigilance and effort, yet also offering the most visible rewards of their labor. Crops that had been nurtured from tender seedlings now stood tall, their leaves stretching wide to capture every ray of sunlight, and the faint whisper of wind across the stalks created a soft, almost musical rustling that was both calming and urgent, a reminder of the precarious balance between abundance and loss. Every day, the farmer would inspect irrigation channels, ensuring water reached each plot, and sometimes diverting flows from small streams with ingenuity, crafting channels from earth and stone to bring life to thirsty roots. The animals played an equally vital role, not merely as sources of meat or milk but as companions, laborers, and even indicators of the land's health. Oxen trudged patiently behind wooden plows, muscles straining under the steady rhythm of work, while goats and sheep grazed on the edges of fields, their movements keeping vegetation in check and their droppings enriching the soil. Chickens scratched eagerly in the dirt, scattering insects, and cows provided milk that would be turned into cheese or butter, forming a staple of the family's diet. The farmer learned to read their behavior, Subtle signs of restlessness or lethargy could indicate illness, the approach of predators, or even changes in the weather. There was a quiet dialogue between humans and animals, one built on observation, patience, and necessity, creating a bond that was as practical as it was emotional. Food continued to be both necessity and subtle pleasure. The summer harvests offered berries, figs, and other fruits, often eaten fresh but also preserved through drying or fermentation to last through the months when the land's generosity was less abundant. Porridges were enriched with honey or seasonal fruits, and bread could be complemented with soft cheeses or occasionally cured meats, shared sparingly among family members. Meals were not hurried affairs. They were moments to discuss the day's work, exchange news from nearby farms, and perhaps speculate on the distant happenings of Rome itself. Merchants brought tales of new laws, rising taxes, or the latest curiosities from the city, and farmers, though bound to their land, were never fully isolated from the empire's pulse. Evenings offered rare respite and opportunities for leisure. Children would continue their play, sometimes reenacting scenes of Roman soldiers, imagining battles and conquests, or improvising games with sticks and stones. Adults might share songs or hum quietly while repairing tools or weaving baskets, the melody soft enough to mingle with the hum of insects and the distant cry of a night bird. Occasionally, neighbors gathered at each other's homes, sharing simple meals, exchanging seeds, or offering advice on cultivation, pest control, or livestock management. These visits reinforced communal bonds, strengthened resilience against misfortune, and provided small pleasures in the monotony of toil. Summer was also a time of vigilance against threats both natural and human. Locusts, aphids, and other insects could devastate entire fields within days, prompting desperate measures: fumigation with smoke, selective weeding, or the creation of protective barriers. Droughts required careful rationing of water, prioritizing essential crops, and improvising with old knowledge of aqueducts, wells, or reservoirs. Even thieves posed a danger, as isolated farms could be vulnerable to bandits or opportunistic travelers seeking quick profit. Farmers developed strategies of security, from simple fences and watchful dogs to local agreements with neighbors to alert one another in times of need. Life demanded constant attentiveness, creativity, and adaptability. But not everything was hardship. The warm summer months allowed for festivals and ritual observances, moments where labor paused and the community celebrated the bounty of the earth. Offerings to Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, were common, often accompanied by dances, songs, and small competitions among villagers. These festivals reinforced cultural identity, created opportunities for social interaction, and allowed for brief indulgence in food, music, and storytelling that would be savored for weeks to come. Tales of legendary farmers, heroic animals, or mysterious occurrences in nearby forests were shared, sometimes whispered in suspense, sometimes recited with laughter, weaving a rich tapestry of oral history that bound the community together. The influence of the broader Roman Empire was subtly present even in the most rural settings. Coins minted in distant provinces, occasionally brought by traders, served not only as currency but also as tangible symbols of the empire's reach. Laws dictated aspects of taxation, market participation, and even crop allocation, and farmers often had to navigate these regulations with both caution and ingenuity. Some adapted by forming cooperative arrangements, lending or borrowing labor, or strategically timing their harvests to meet market demands while avoiding excessive scrutiny. These interactions, although seemingly minor, reflected a sophisticated understanding of economics, law, and diplomacy at a scale far smaller than the grandeur of Rome itself, but equally vital to the survival and prosperity of the household. During these months, gossip traveled as quickly as news. Stories of ambitious senators, local magistrates, or distant military campaigns sparked curiosity, speculation, and sometimes anxiety among the villagers. Rumors of invasions or rebellions were discussed cautiously, filtered through layers of interpretation and embellishment, yet they shaped perception and influenced decisions, from when to plant, when to guard livestock, to how to negotiate trade. Farmers understood that while they could control the land, they could not control the world beyond it, and so prudence, observation, and preparation became constant companions. Evenings, though brief, became moments of reflection. The sun would sink low, casting long shadows across furrows and grazing fields, and the air would carry scents of grass, herbs, and the faint smoke of hearth fires. Families gathered once more, not only to eat but to connect, recount small triumphs, plan for the next day, and share fleeting laughter. The cycles of work, rest, and socialization were tightly intertwined, creating a rhythm that, although repetitive, was never entirely predictable. Each day brought subtle variations, challenges, and rewards, ensuring that even the most routine activities retained an element of suspense and interest. As summer slowly surrendered to the subtle chill of early autumn, the Roman countryside began to change in ways that were both dramatic and understated. Fields that had once stood tall and vibrant gradually shifted to shades of amber and russet, signaling the approach of harvest. For the farmer, this was the most intense season, filled with a mix of excitement, anxiety, and relentless labor. Days became a delicate balance between seizing the moment to gather ripened crops and preparing the land for the months to come. Each morning, the air was crisp with dew, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and the distant aroma of wildflowers fading in the twilight of their season. There was a particular rhythm to autumn, a cadence dictated by the slow turning of leaves, the ripening of grains, and the golden warmth of sunlight that lingered longer in the mornings and evenings. Harvest itself was a communal affair. Families worked together, using sickles to cut wheat and barley, carefully bundling the stalks into sheaves that could be stored or transported. Children, now more skilled in the tasks of the farm, carried small bundles or helped guide animals, their laughter mingling with the groaning of oxen as they pulled carts laden with produce. Even the simplest chores were infused with attention and precision. Grains had to be threshed carefully to prevent loss, legumes gathered without crushing, and vegetables stored in cool, dry spaces to prevent spoilage. Farmers often exchanged labor with neighbors, forming temporary alliances that ensured fields could be harvested efficiently, a social choreography that blended necessity, cooperation, and subtle joy in shared accomplishment. Food during this time reflected the bounty of the land. Autumn offered a richer variety than any other season: fresh fruits, harvested grains, and vegetables that had matured under summer sun. Porridges were enriched with dried fruits, bread accompanied by cheeses, and preserved meats occasionally made an appearance on the table. Wine and water remained staples, often infused with herbs for flavor and slight medicinal properties. Meals became moments not only for nourishment but for reflection, discussions about the upcoming winter, and plans for next year's planting. The preparation of food itself was a meticulous process, preserving the summer's abundance in jars, woven baskets, and storage pits that could last through the cold months when the land no longer offered freely. Autumn evenings, cool and quiet, were ideal for storytelling and the subtle pleasures of leisure. Around the hearth, families shared tales of legendary farmers, clever animals, and mysterious events in the forests or along rivers. Some stories were humorous, meant to elicit laughter after long days of labor, while others carried cautionary lessons or moral reflections. Children absorbed these stories attentively, learning not only entertainment but practical wisdom: how to recognize signs of approaching storms, the behavior of certain pests, or the subtle hints of fertile soil. Music occasionally accompanied these gatherings, simple tunes played on flutes or stringed instruments, creating a soft soundtrack to the lives of those bound to the land yet capable of imagination and delight. Community interaction remained crucial, particularly as harvest demanded additional hands and coordination. Farmers coordinated the storage and trade of surplus, negotiated with local markets, and occasionally traveled to nearby towns to exchange goods or seek services unavailable within the village. Market trips were always rich in observation and information. Travelers brought news from distant provinces, stories of political developments in Rome, and rumors of military campaigns or unrest. Farmers were attentive listeners, often blending these reports into their own narratives, gauging the implications for their land, livestock, and family. These connections, though subtle, tied the rural to the urban, the isolated farmstead to the sprawling empire, and reminded each household that their labor, though localized, was part of a far larger system. Autumn also brought renewed attention to animal husbandry. Sheep and goats required careful tending as the weather cooled. cows needed preparation for the impending scarcity of pasture, and pigs were fattened in anticipation of winter consumption. Farmers monitored health vigilantly, applying herbal remedies, observing behavior for early signs of illness, and adjusting feeding practices based on seasonal availability. The work demanded both knowledge and intuition, a blend of science, tradition, and careful observation honed over generations. Mistakes could have serious consequences, not only for sustenance but for the economic stability of the household, yet the constant learning process ensured that each season built upon the lessons of the last. The approach of winter created a mixture of anticipation and foreboding. Fires were stoked more frequently, providing warmth and a center for domestic life. Storage of grains, vegetables, and preserved foods became a daily concern, ensuring the family could survive until spring. Tasks shifted subtly from planting and tending to maintenance, repairing roofs, reinforcing fences, and ensuring tools were in good condition for the next planting season. Even the small details mattered. A broken wheel could delay transport of produce, a leak in a granary could ruin the summer's labor, and a neglected fence might invite predators or thieves. Attention to these minutiae reflected the interwoven nature of work, survival, and prudence that defined the life of a Roman farmer. Interestingly, the farmers also maintained a relationship with the unseen, the gods and spirits that were believed to influence every aspect of life. Small shrines or offerings, placed at the edges of fields, at doorways, or near livestock, represented a quiet ritual of hope and protection. Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, was honored particularly during harvest, with careful offerings intended to ensure fertility of the soil for the next season. These rituals were neither ostentatious nor theatrical but integrated into the daily rhythms of life, blending faith with practice in a way that reinforced the subtle understanding that human effort was always interwoven with forces beyond control. As autumn faded and winter began to cast its long shadows over the Roman countryside, the rhythm of life shifted once more, slower yet no less demanding. The air grew crisp and sharp, carrying the faint scent of frost and damp earth, while the sun rose later and disappeared sooner, leaving long hours of dim light and chill. For the farmer, winter was both a time of rest and vigilance. The soil that had been so generous during summer now lay dormant, waiting beneath frost and snow, and yet the work of survival continued. Animals needed extra care. Cows required shelter from the cold winds, pigs needed sufficient fodder, and chickens demanded dry, warm spaces to lay their eggs. Every household member, from the youngest child to the eldest elder, participated in these essential routines, reinforcing bonds of duty, knowledge, and necessity. Meals during winter reflected both creativity and frugality. With fresh vegetables scarce, farmers relied heavily on stored produce. Root vegetables like turnips, carrots, and onions, along with dried legumes and grains, formed the bulk of daily sustenance. Preserved fruits added sweetness to porridges, while cheeses and salted meats provided protein. Fires burned constantly in hearths, not only for warmth but as centers of activity. Cooking, mending clothes, weaving baskets, and telling stories that both entertained and educated. The family gathered around these fires, their faces lit by flickering flames, sharing small jokes, memories of summer, and sometimes whispered rumors from markets or travelers passing through nearby villages. Even in the harshness of winter, moments of connection and warmth punctuated the monotony of survival. Winter also brought unique challenges, particularly in travel and trade. Roads became muddy or icy, streams froze partially, and access to distant markets was limited. Farmers had to plan carefully, ensuring that essential supplies such as salt, olive oil, or tools were acquired before the onset of severe weather. Occasionally, travel was unavoidable, and trips to nearby towns became exercises in endurance, requiring knowledge of terrain, weather patterns, and sometimes the goodwill of neighbors to ensure safe passage. Even minor miscalculations could result in wasted time, lost goods, or, in extreme cases, injury. Thus, winter demanded foresight, prudence, and collaboration, reinforcing the intimate connection between human effort and natural cycles. Despite these difficulties, winter offered opportunities for reflection, education, and planning. Children, unable to spend long hours outdoors, often engaged in learning activities, guided by parents or elders. They practiced reading and writing, learned practical arithmetic for trade and accounting, or absorbed lessons about agriculture, animal husbandry, and household management. The younger generation also absorbed the rich oral traditions that permeated village life. Stories of distant lands, heroic ancestors, clever farmers, or mysterious occurrences in the forests. These narratives were not only entertainment but served to educate, instill moral lessons, and preserve collective memory, bridging generations and embedding local knowledge into the fabric of everyday life. Social interactions, though less frequent than in summer, remained essential. Villages organized small gatherings around fires, sharing surplus produce, repairing tools collaboratively, or simply discussing the latest news from markets and travelers. Gossip traveled quickly in these settings. Tales of new governors, distant wars, rumors of imperial decrees, or accounts of strange happenings in other provinces sparked curiosity, speculation, and sometimes anxiety. Farmers listened attentively, interpreting such information in practical terms. How taxes might change, how market prices could fluctuate, or whether seasonal conditions in neighboring regions might affect their own planning. These conversations wove the rural community into the wider fabric of the empire, reminding all that even in isolation, life was part of a larger system. Animals, too, shaped the rhythm of winter life in subtle ways. Their behaviors offered clues about impending weather, health conditions, and even seasonal shifts. Livestock required careful observation to prevent illness, ensure proper feeding, and maintain warmth. Farmers often experimented with different bedding materials, arrangements of stalls, or feeding techniques, learning over time which methods improved survival and productivity. The bond between human and animal was not merely functional. It was shaped by familiarity, observation, and respect. Farmers knew that their well-being and that of their family depended on the health and productivity of the animals, making care an ongoing labor of attention, empathy, and experience. Winter evenings were also rich with ritual and quiet observation. Small shrines and offerings continued to mark the connection to the divine. Simple ceremonies, prayers, and gifts of grains or fruits were made to ensure favor in the coming year. Farmers understood that human effort alone could not guarantee success. The gods, along with the cycles of nature, held ultimate sway. This awareness influenced both practical and spiritual decisions, reinforcing a worldview in which survival, prosperity, and culture were intertwined. In the quietest hours of the night, when winds howled through bare branches and frost covered the land, farmers sometimes took solace in contemplation. They gazed at constellations, traced familiar patterns in the sky, and reflected on the delicate balance that structured their lives. Labor and leisure, risk and reward, observation and intuition. Sleep, when it came, was both deep and dream-filled, often reflecting the day's labor, hopes for the next season, and faint imaginings of distant cities, markets, and stories carried by traveling merchants. The continuity of seasons, the reliability of certain routines, and the unpredictability of the natural world created a rhythm that was steady yet full of subtle surprises, shaping a life that, while physically demanding, was also rich in observation, learning, and quiet wonder. Even in the starkness of winter, there were moments of levity and fascination. Children, unable to roam the fields freely, created games using sticks, stones, or scraps of cloth. Adults sometimes engaged in playful competitions, testing strength, skill, or endurance, in ways that strengthened social bonds while offering respite from labor. Stories recounted around the fire could be suspenseful, humorous, or cautionary, fostering imagination while reinforcing practical knowledge. These interactions, though seemingly minor, contributed to a shared sense of identity and continuity, embedding cultural memory into the most ordinary aspects of daily life. As the grip of winter slowly loosened, the first hints of spring began to emerge, subtle yet undeniable, transforming the Roman countryside in ways that were almost imperceptible at first. Early mornings carried a damp, earthy scent, as snow and frost retreated to hidden corners and streams swelled with the melting ice. Farmers rose with cautious optimism, aware that the land was awakening but still fragile, the timing of each planting, each preparation, could determine the success or failure of an entire year's labor. The soil, once hard and frozen, gradually softened, revealing a tapestry of rich brown tones speckled with the remnants of last season's harvest, and the farmer's hands, calloused and skilled, eagerly traced the contours of each furrow, searching for subtle clues about moisture, fertility, and the readiness of the ground to receive new seeds. Livestock, too, responded to the changing season. Animals that had spent months in shelter began to stir with renewed energy. Chickens clucked more actively, exploring thawed patches of earth, while cows and goats grazed carefully in the sparse greenery that peeked through the thawing fields. Oxen, rested from the intensity of winter labor, were gradually readied for plowing and heavy work, responding to commands with a combination of muscle memory and gentle persuasion. Farmers observed their behavior keenly, the brightness in an animal's eye, the sheen of its coat, or the vigor of its movements provided essential information about health, diet, and readiness for the demanding months ahead. Each day was a negotiation, balancing care, effort, and timing to ensure that both humans and animals could thrive together. Spring meals reflected the transition in the environment. Fresh greens appeared, sometimes foraged from the edges of woods or carefully cultivated in sheltered plots. Early herbs like parsley, mint, and wild garlic added subtle flavors to simple porridge, stews, and bread. Stored grains and preserved foods from winter remained important, but the promise of new growth brought renewed creativity to the preparation of daily meals. Occasionally, hunters or traveling merchants brought small quantities of fresh meat or fish, adding variety to the diet and reinforcing the connection between rural households and the wider world. Meals were shared with quiet reflection, as families considered the work ahead and marveled at the tiny, yet potent, signs of life returning to the fields. The rhythm of labor shifted with the season. Plowing began in earnest, careful to prepare the soil without eroding its structure, while sowing followed immediately after, guided by accumulated knowledge of crop rotation, soil quality, and the subtle patterns of sun, wind, and rainfall. Children, now more adept and responsible, assisted with planting seeds, guiding oxen, or constructing rudimentary supports for budding plants. Even the simplest actions required observation, patience, and attentiveness, as a single misstep, overwatering, planting too densely, or disturbing the tender shoots, could have consequences that stretched across weeks or months. Social dynamics, too, were influenced by the seasonal change. Villages became hubs of coordinated activity as neighbors exchanged labor, tools, and advice, ensuring that planting was completed efficiently and effectively. Discussions during these times were rich with information, subtle innovations in irrigation, hints about pest control, forecasts based on past experience, and gossip that carried both amusement and practical warnings. Travelers occasionally brought news from distant towns or reports of political developments, weaving the rural communities into the wider fabric of Roman life. Farmers absorbed this information with care, interpreting it through the lens of experience and practicality, knowing that understanding distant events could have direct implications for the local survival and prosperity of their households. Spring also brought small rituals and spiritual observances. Offerings were made to ensure fertility, to protect crops from frost or pests, and to honor the cycles that governed life and labor. Small shrines at the edge of fields, simple ceremonies involving grain, water, or incense, reflected the intimate connection between human effort and the unseen forces that were believed to influence it. These rituals, subtle yet persistent, reinforced both practical and cultural knowledge, blending faith, habit, and hope into the daily routines of work, observation, and preparation. Children, freed from the isolation of winter, explored the changing landscape with curiosity and energy. Streams that had been frozen or sluggish now carried fresh water, inviting playful experiments, the building of small dams or miniature boats from twigs, and lessons in observation and cause and effect. Birds returned, their songs heralding warmer days, while insects buzzed lazily among budding flowers. These encounters with the natural world were both entertainment and education, teaching attentiveness, patience, and the intricate web of relationships that sustained life on the farm. Evenings carried a particular calm, tempered by both fatigue and satisfaction. Fires burned longer as families gathered to discuss the day's work, plan for the next, and share stories that mixed humor, morality, and subtle reflections on life. Tales of heroic ancestors, clever animals, and unexplained phenomena from surrounding forests created a narrative landscape as rich as the fields themselves. Sometimes, discussions touched upon markets, trade, and distant events in Rome, offering intellectual stimulation alongside the practical realities of labor. These moments reminded everyone that their lives, though intimately tied to the soil, were part of a broader human experience shaped by culture, tradition, and observation. The physical work of spring was relentless, yet punctuated with small pleasures. The feel of freshly tilled soil, the sight of seedlings breaking through the ground, or the gentle warmth of the sun on tired shoulders provided sensory rewards that balanced the exertion. Farmers often paused to observe patterns, how sunlight moved across the field, how soil responded to moisture, how plants leaned toward the best source of nutrients, learning continuously from both success and failure. Observation, adaptation, and careful planning were essential skills, passed down through oral tradition, experience, and subtle experimentation, ensuring that each season built upon the lessons of the last. As spring matured, the Roman countryside came alive in ways that were both vivid and relentless, filling the senses with sights, sounds, and scents that reminded the farmer that life was an intricate balance of toil and reward. The soil, now thoroughly thawed and enriched by months of careful preparation, bore the first tangible fruits of labor. Tiny shoots pushed through the earth, tender and fragile, yet brimming with potential. Farmers observed them with meticulous attention, noting how each plant responded to sunlight, moisture, and the subtle guidance of wind. Every day, hands moved over the fields, weeding, adjusting irrigation, and guiding oxen to plow where the soil remained uneven. The work demanded both stamina and subtlety. Even a moment of negligence could result in lost seeds, wilted plants, or soil erosion that might compromise the harvest. The soundscape of the farm had shifted dramatically. Birds returned in force, their songs marking territory and attracting mates, while the gentle hum of bees signaled pollination and the promise of fruits yet to come. Streams babbled more energetically, carrying the melted winter snows and nourishing the fields. Insects crawled, chirped, and buzzed, some beneficial and some threatening, creating a constant backdrop of life that the farmer had learned to interpret carefully. To the untrained eye, the landscape might appear serene, yet beneath the surface was a dynamic ecosystem that required observation, insight, and intervention to maintain the delicate balance between productivity and ruin. Meals reflected the burgeoning season. Early greens, tender shoots of wild herbs, and sprouted grains made their way into porridges and stews, complemented by the occasional fresh milk or cheese from well-tended livestock. Bread remained a staple, often baked in small hearths, while fruits foraged or traded from nearby villages added a sweetness that contrasted with the hearty staples of winter. Each meal was not merely sustenance but a reinforcement of knowledge, cooking techniques, preservation methods, and the nuanced use of seasonal flavors were essential skills that blended practicality with subtle artistry. Children participated actively, learning how to identify edible plants, combine flavors, and prepare simple dishes, a subtle education that intertwined survival with culture. Labor was punctuated by moments of reflection and minor innovation. Farmers experimented with crop spacing, irrigation techniques, and even the use of companion plants to improve soil fertility and deter pests. Observing the behavior of oxen, the tilt of leaves, or the moisture content of soil, they adapted daily practices to maximize yield. Occasionally, they borrowed ideas from neighbors or travelers, exchanging tips that ranged from simple adjustments in plowing to more elaborate suggestions about water management or seed selection. These interactions, subtle and informal, created a network of shared knowledge that was constantly evolving, ensuring that each season could build on the lessons of the last. Spring also brought a subtle shift in social dynamics. Villages coordinated activities more closely, sharing labor and tools to ensure that planting and early cultivation proceeded efficiently. Gatherings at homes or communal spaces offered opportunities to exchange seeds, discuss market conditions, or recount tales from distant lands. Stories were varied. Some recounted heroic deeds, clever solutions to agricultural challenges or moral lessons embedded in the behavior of animals. Others offered gossip about distant governors, imperial decrees, or unusual events in neighboring villages. Even casual conversation carried layers of meaning, blending entertainment, caution, and practical knowledge. Farmers were attentive listeners, interpreting each piece of information for its potential impact on crops, livestock, and trade. Animals remained central to the rhythm of daily life. Oxen, now rested from winter, pulled plows with a combination of strength and learned obedience, responding to subtle commands that reflected months or years of interaction. Cows grazed carefully in early pasture, while goats and sheep explored new chutes, contributing to soil enrichment and natural weeding. Chickens pecked energetically, scattering insects and fertilizing small patches of ground. The farmer's attention to the animal's health, diet, and behavior was constant, a blend of observation, intuition, and practical care. Mistakes could be costly, but careful observation allowed for small interventions that preserved both productivity and well-being, reinforcing the intricate interdependence between humans and the creatures they tended. Spring evenings were rich with sensory and social complexity. The air carried the fragrance of freshly turned soil, budding plants, and the faint smoke of distant hearths. Families gathered after labor, sharing small meals, repairing tools, and exchanging news. Music, sometimes played on simple flutes or stringed instruments, punctuated these gatherings, accompanying storytelling, playful games, or quiet reflection. Children engaged in imaginative play, often mirroring the work they observed during the day, experimenting with small-scale farming, building miniature structures, or recreating scenes from stories passed down through generations. The line between work, play, and education blurred, creating a dynamic, continuous learning environment that was as much about survival as it was about culture. The influence of the broader empire remained subtly present, even in these isolated fields. Coins, imported goods, and market exchanges reminded the farmer that local life was connected to distant cities and political centers. News from Rome or other provinces filtered through travelers and merchants, often distorted, yet carrying kernels of practical importance. Shifts in taxation, trade regulations, or imperial campaigns could all influence decisions about what to plant, when to sell, or how to allocate labor. Farmers learned to interpret these stories, blending rumor, observation, and experience into actionable insight, a skill as critical as the physical labor of cultivation. As daylight faded, the farm did not entirely rest. Animals required final checks, water had to be replenished, and small tasks like repairing fences, tending seedlings, or arranging harvested materials ensured that the next day could begin without disruption. Sleep arrived as a natural consequence of exertion, carrying dreams shaped by the cycle of life, visions of flourishing fields, playful children, bustling markets, and distant towns. Even in these quiet hours, the rhythms of the farm persisted, subtle yet constant, weaving together labor, observation, social bonds, and imagination into a coherent pattern that defined existence in the Roman countryside. As late spring shifted toward early summer, the Roman countryside seemed to hum with vitality, a living mosaic of colors, textures, and sounds that both delighted and challenged the farmer. Fields, now fully sown, displayed a patchwork of green, from the tender shoots of wheat to the more established legumes and vegetables, all stretching toward the increasing sun. The rhythm of work became both repetitive and endlessly varied, plowing small patches for new crops, ensuring irrigation reached every furrow, tending to young seedlings vulnerable to sudden storms, and constantly observing the subtle cues in soil, air, and animal behavior that signaled potential success or failure. Each morning was greeted with a careful survey of the fields, hands tracing the contours of the earth, eyes scanning for the first signs of pest infestation or nutrient deficiency, ears attuned to the faintest sound of shifting weather or wandering animals. Animals had adapted fully to the warmth, yet they demanded constant attention. Oxen, once rested from winter, now worked tirelessly in plowing or pulling carts laden with early harvests. Goats and sheep grazed strategically, helping to manage weeds while fertilizing the ground, their movements almost choreographed through experience and observation. Chickens and ducks scattered across open yards, pecking for insects and seeds, contributing in subtle ways to the productivity of the farm. The farmer's role extended beyond labor. It was a constant dialogue with creatures whose needs, instincts, and behaviors provided both guidance and challenge. Each observation could inform the next task, from adjusting feed to reinforcing fences, or even rearranging pastures to maximize yield and minimize stress. Meals began to reflect the early abundance of the season. Fresh vegetables, tender lettuce, radishes, onions, and herbs joined hearty staples like porridge, bread, and cheese, often seasoned with honey or herbs for variety. Early fruits such as cherries or apricots appeared, consumed quickly when ripe or preserved in simple syrups for use later in the year. Families appreciated these fleeting gifts of nature, eating together in quiet reflection or using the opportunity to teach children the importance of tasting, preparing, and preserving food. Even simple cooking was an exercise in observation, knowing when vegetables were perfectly tender, how to balance flavors, and which combinations could sustain energy during long hours of labor became an art as subtle as any cultural or religious ritual. The social rhythm of early summer intertwined closely with labor. Villages coordinated communal efforts for planting and tending larger plots, sharing tools, manpower, and advice in an intricate web of reciprocity. Gossip remained central, often mingled with practical guidance. News of market trends, rumors of tax changes, and tales of unusual weather events or animal behavior all carried potential lessons. Children, more independent than in winter, played in fields, learning through imitation and observation, absorbing knowledge that would guide them in adulthood. They experimented with small-scale planting, care of animals, and simple measurements, turning labor into a combination of work, play, and education. Festivals began to appear in subtle forms, small celebrations interwoven into the cycles of planting and tending. Offerings to Ceres or other local deities were made with a blend of ritual precision and communal spirit, sometimes accompanied by songs, music, or storytelling. These moments punctuated the relentless labor, providing an emotional and cultural anchor, reminding the farmer that work was inseparable from tradition, faith, and social cohesion. Such gatherings reinforced identity, encouraged collaboration, and allowed for temporary relief from the intensity of seasonal labor. Yet the season was not without its challenges. Sudden rainstorms could damage tender crops, while insects and other pests required constant monitoring and inventive responses. Farmers employed a combination of natural deterrents, timing of labor, and learned observation to minimize losses. Livestock needed vigilant care. Summer heat could stress animals, making adequate water, shelter, and feed critical. Even minor mistakes could have cascading consequences, emphasizing the need for attention to detail, adaptability, and knowledge passed down through generations. Each day offered lessons in patience, resilience, and the subtle interplay between human labor and natural forces. Stories continued to circulate among families and villages, often blending practical advice with entertainment. Tales of heroic farmers, clever animals, or mysterious events in the surrounding countryside reinforced cultural memory while subtly instructing younger generations. News of distant towns or political developments, though often distorted through retelling, provided opportunities for interpretation and planning, a blend of rumor, observation, and practical application. These narratives maintained connection to the wider Roman world, reminding even the most isolated farmstead that life extended beyond the immediate horizon. Evenings were long and warm, offering rare moments of leisure. Families gathered around fires, sharing meals, repairing tools, or simply observing the subtle changes in the landscape as daylight faded. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth, flowering plants, and the faint smoke of hearth fires. Children engaged in imaginative play, often mirroring adult labor or recreating stories they had heard, turning the land into a living classroom and theater simultaneously. Adults occasionally shared songs or recited poetry, connecting the physical labor of the day to the cultural and emotional life of the community. As night descended, the sounds of the countryside shifted. Crickets and nocturnal insects filled the air with persistent hums, while distant owls hooted, marking territory and hunting prey. Farmers performed final rounds, checking fences, ensuring water troughs were full, and verifying that animals were settled safely for the night. Only after these tasks could sleep arrive, heavy yet restorative, carrying visions of thriving fields, bustling markets, and the intricate web of life that defined the farmstead. In this continuous interplay of work, observation, social connection, and reflection, the farmer's life, though physically demanding, revealed layers of subtlety, insight, and satisfaction that stretched beyond mere survival into a lived understanding of nature, culture, and human ingenuity. As summer fully descended upon the Roman countryside, the heat became a constant companion, wrapping fields and homesteads in a haze of warmth that was both comforting and relentless. The sun rose high and strong, its rays intensifying the colors of the crops, the green of young leaves deepening into a rich, almost luminous hue, while the soil, dark and fertile, radiated warmth that could be felt through bare hands. Farmers adapted to the shifting rhythm, beginning work in the earliest hours of the day to avoid the harshest midday heat, pausing occasionally to drink cool water drawn from wells, and adjusting tasks to match the sun's movement and intensity. Labor was ceaseless yet measured. Plowing, weeding, tending to livestock, and checking irrigation systems all demanded precise timing and careful attention. Crops began to show the first signs of maturity. Wheat heads bowed under the weight of developing grains, legumes formed clusters of pods, and vegetables expanded in leafy abundance, promising sustenance for months to come. Farmers observed these changes with a mixture of satisfaction and vigilance, knowing that early signs of disease, pests, or drought could undermine months of careful labor. Every movement in the fields carried both purpose and awareness. The placement of a hand, the direction of a plow, the selection of water for irrigation, all were small interventions with potentially far-reaching consequences. Each day was an exercise in observation, decision-making, and adaptation, a continuous dialogue between human effort and the unpredictable forces of nature. Livestock reflected the intensity of the season. Cows sought shaded areas under trees, their breath visible in the morning chill but quickly replaced by the heat of the day. Goats and sheep grazed cautiously, avoiding plants that had grown too tough or dry, while chickens scratched for insects in the early morning before retreating to cooler areas as the sun climbed. The farmer's role was part guardian, part observer, ensuring that each animal received adequate food and water while monitoring for signs of fatigue or illness. Observing their behavior offered subtle clues about the environment. An ox reluctant to plow might signal dry or compacted soil, while chickens scratching excessively could indicate insect infestations nearby. Such insights were small yet crucial pieces of a complex puzzle. Meals became more vibrant with the season's offerings. Fresh vegetables were abundant, early fruits like berries or plums added sweetness, and dairy products continued to enrich the diet. Bread remained a central staple, often accompanied by herbs, honey, or preserved foods stored from winter. The act of eating was intertwined with observation. Noticing subtle flavors, textures, or signs of spoilage became an essential skill, particularly when preparing for long days of labor. Children continued to learn through participation, tasting, preparing, and understanding the intricacies of nourishment that would sustain their family through the coming months. Even simple dishes reflected accumulated knowledge, creativity, and a delicate balance between necessity and pleasure. Social interactions expanded with the intensity of summer. Villagers coordinated labor to manage larger plots and increasingly abundant crops, sharing tools, manpower, and advice. Market trips became more frequent, both to sell early produce and to acquire goods not locally available. News traveled quickly. Rumors of political developments in Rome, stories of unusual weather or disasters in neighboring provinces, and accounts of trade opportunities informed decisions on planting, selling, or preserving crops. Farmers interpreted these stories carefully, blending rumor, observation, and experience into strategies that affected both immediate survival and long-term prosperity. Summer brought its own small rituals and cultural practices. Offerings to Ceres or other deities were made to protect crops from drought, pests, or storms. Families observed these traditions with quiet reverence, often accompanied by small songs, storytelling, or communal meals that reinforced social cohesion. Even minor celebrations, an early successful harvest, a well-reared animal, or the safe return of a neighbor from market, became opportunities for reflection and temporary respite from labor. These rituals connected everyday toil to broader cultural and spiritual frameworks, embedding practical work within a rich tapestry of belief and tradition. Challenges were constant. Sudden heat waves, unexpected rainstorms, or pest infestations could threaten even the most meticulously tended crops. Farmers employed all available knowledge and observation to mitigate losses, adjusting watering schedules, using natural deterrents, or reinforcing protective measures around vulnerable plants. Each decision carried weight, as errors could cascade into weeks of lost productivity. Livestock, too, required vigilant care. The heat increased risks of fatigue, dehydration, or disease, making constant observation and adaptation critical. The farmer's experience, intuition, and attention to subtle environmental cues became essential tools in maintaining equilibrium between work, survival, and prosperity. Children, now adept at observing and assisting, participated in labor with increasing responsibility. They carried water, guided animals, or tended small plots, their play and work intertwined. Learning remained continuous. Practical lessons about plants, soil, and animals were reinforced through storytelling, observation, and direct involvement. Socialization continued through small gatherings, collaborative tasks, and shared leisure, all creating a rich context for both knowledge and cultural memory. Evenings were long and warm, filled with a symphony of natural sounds: buzzing insects, croaking frogs near water sources, and distant animal calls. Families gathered to eat, repair tools, share news, and reflect on the day's work. Fires were lit in simple hearths, both for warmth as the night cooled and as centers for social and cultural exchange. Stories of clever ancestors, animal behavior, and unexplained phenomena intertwined with reports from markets or travelers, blending entertainment, education, and subtle preparation for potential challenges ahead. These quiet hours reinforced continuity, observation, and connection, binding the physical, cultural, and social threads of rural life into a coherent and enduring pattern. As night deepened, the farmer performed final rounds, checking fences, securing livestock, and ensuring water supplies were sufficient. The rhythm of life continued, a blend of labor, vigilance, observation, and reflection. Sleep brought dreams shaped by the day, visions of thriving fields, playful children, bustling markets, and the ongoing dialogue between human effort and the unpredictable forces of nature. Summer, though intense and demanding, offered both rewards and challenges, revealing a life defined by connection, observation, and a profound understanding of the land and its cycles, where each season layered upon the last, creating a continuous story of labor, resilience, and subtle wonder. As summer reached its peak, the Roman countryside became a tapestry of motion, color, and scent, a vibrant landscape both beautiful and demanding. Fields stretched endlessly, golden waves of wheat swaying in the heat, legumes forming dense clusters, and vegetables expanding rapidly in response to sun and irrigation. The farmer moved among them with practiced precision, checking for signs of ripeness, disease, or insect damage, hands brushing over stalks and leaves as if reading a subtle language written by the earth itself. The rhythm of labor was intense. Plowing, weeding, watering, and harvesting small early crops all required careful attention, timing, and stamina. Each task was intertwined with countless others. A misstep in one corner could ripple across the entire field, affecting yield, livestock, and even the timing of market trips. Livestock demanded constant vigilance under the sweltering sun. Cows sought shade, resting intermittently while the farmer ensured they had sufficient water and nourishment. Goats and sheep grazed carefully, avoiding areas where heat had hardened the soil or where insects were more prevalent. Chickens and ducks flitted about, pecking for insects and refreshing their feathers in shallow water. The farmer's observational skills were critical. Subtle changes in behavior indicated stress, illness, or environmental hazards. Adjustments, moving animals to cooler areas, supplementing feed, or applying rudimentary pest deterrents, were daily necessities, each small decision a balancing act with potentially significant consequences. Meals reflected the fullness of the season. Fresh fruits, cherries, early plums, and even the first figs joined tender vegetables in stews, salads, and simple porridges. Bread remained central, often enriched with herbs, cheese, or honey for flavor. Families valued these foods both for nourishment and for the sensory pleasure of seasonal abundance. Children participated actively, helping to prepare meals, foraging for herbs, and learning preservation techniques like drying or salting to ensure that the summer's bounty could last through the year. These lessons, subtle yet persistent, blended survival skills with cultural knowledge, linking generations through practical experience. The social rhythm intensified. Villages coordinated efforts to harvest, share tools, and plan market trips, balancing labor and opportunity. Markets buzzed with life, as early crops, dairy products, and handcrafted goods were exchanged for items not available locally. News traveled quickly. Reports of imperial edicts, weather events, or pest infestations in neighboring provinces reached villages through merchants and travelers. Farmers interpreted these stories with discernment, adjusting planting, storage, and sales strategies accordingly. Even gossip carried value, serving as a subtle guide to potential threats or opportunities. Early summer festivals and communal gatherings offered brief respite from labor. Offerings to Ceres or other local deities were made with songs, prayers, and sometimes small feasts, thanking divine forces for favorable growth and seeking protection against drought, storms, or pests. Children observed these rituals, internalizing both cultural practice and the understanding that human effort was intertwined with spiritual life. Storytelling continued around fires in the evenings, blending humor, morality, and cautionary tales about clever farmers, heroic ancestors, or mysterious events in forests and nearby towns. These narratives reinforced community identity, offered practical lessons, and provided entertainment, all while connecting daily labor to a broader cultural and spiritual context. Despite abundance, challenges remained constant. Sudden heat waves, thunderstorms, or unanticipated insect infestations tested resilience. Farmers responded with a mix of foresight, improvisation, and careful observation, adjusting watering schedules, creating shade structures, or removing affected plants. Livestock required constant monitoring to prevent dehydration, fatigue, or disease. The stakes were high. Minor mistakes could cascade into weeks of lost yield or weakened herds. Experience, intuition, and attentiveness became as critical as physical labor in maintaining stability and ensuring that the season's efforts would bear fruit. Children, now increasingly competent, assisted in daily tasks with both practical skill and playful creativity. They guided animals, carried water, tended seedlings, and even experimented with small-scale planting, blending work and learning. Play often mimicked adult activity, reinforcing lessons about observation, timing, and attention to detail. Socialization through collaborative labor, shared meals, and evening storytelling created a context in which practical knowledge and cultural continuity were inseparable, embedding both survival skills and moral lessons within everyday life. Evenings grew long, heavy with warmth, scent, and sound. Insects buzzed persistently, frogs croaked near water sources, and the distant call of nocturnal birds added layers to the night symphony. Families gathered, completing final tasks, repairing tools, sharing meals, and reflecting on the day's work. Fires burned in hearths, providing warmth, light, and focal points for storytelling or music. These quiet moments, though seemingly ordinary, were essential for continuity, cultural memory, and the reinforcement of social bonds, balancing the intensity of physical labor with reflection, observation, and shared experience. Sleep came deeply, carrying dreams shaped by the rhythm of work, the sense of ripening crops, the sounds of livestock, and the anticipation of markets and harvests. The life of a Roman farmer in midsummer was an intricate dance of observation, labor, social connection, and adaptation to environmental forces. Each day layered upon the last, creating a continuity of effort, knowledge, and cultural memory that defined existence in the countryside, connecting humans, animals, and the land in a complex, dynamic system that required skill, attention, and resilience. As summer gradually began to inch toward its later weeks, The Roman countryside remained a living canvas of abundance, warmth, and constant motion, each day layered with labor, observation, and subtle surprises. Fields, heavy with crops nearing maturity, glowed in golden tones beneath the high sun, while vegetables and legumes displayed full, lush foliage, promising sustenance and trade goods for weeks ahead. The farmer's rhythm had adapted completely to the season. Early mornings were devoted to the most demanding labor, tending seedlings that required extra care, checking irrigation, and guiding oxen through plowed soil. Midday heat demanded rest and careful hydration, punctuated with small tasks like mending tools, adjusting trellises, or inspecting livestock. Evenings allowed a reflective pace, gathering harvests, repairing fences, and sharing stories before night fully settled. Each motion, though familiar, demanded attention, as subtle changes in plant color, soil moisture, or animal behavior could signal both opportunity and threat. Livestock had settled into routines shaped by experience and the heat of summer. Cows sought shade under trees or in the folds of low hills, chewing cud slowly while their caretaker ensured access to fresh water and adequate feed. Sheep and goats roamed carefully, nibbling tender leaves and avoiding areas scorched by sun, while chickens moved restlessly across open yards, scratching for insects and resting in shaded corners. The farmer's connection with animals had become almost instinctual. A slight change in gait, the angle of the head, or the tone of a bleat or lowing could reveal subtle shifts in health or mood, prompting immediate adjustments in care. Observation, intuition, and timely action maintained the delicate balance between productivity, well-being, and environmental stress. Meals reflected the season's abundance and variation. Fresh vegetables, beans, lettuces, onions, were joined by early fruits like figs and berries, their flavors celebrated in simple porridges, breads, and stews. Dairy products, including cheese and milk, complemented these dishes, while honey or herbs enhanced taste and nutrition. Families valued these meals both for their sustenance and as markers of seasonal change, discussing flavors, textures, and the relative success of crops. Children participated eagerly, learning the subtle art of preparation, preservation, and tasting, their small hands acquiring knowledge that would become indispensable in adulthood. Culinary skills intertwined with survival, observation, and cultural tradition, forming a thread that connected generations through everyday practice. The social fabric of village life was both lively and essential. Cooperative labor became increasingly strategic as crops reached maturity. Neighbors exchanged tools, offered guidance on harvesting, or assisted in managing early yields to ensure that no plant or fruit was lost to neglect. Markets were vibrant, with early harvests traded for goods unavailable locally, news from distant towns circulating rapidly. Stories, rumors, and reports of imperial edicts, local taxes, and weather events informed decisions, blending entertainment with practical insight. Farmers interpreted these narratives carefully, weighing probability, experience, and timing to optimize outcomes in both agriculture and trade. Early summer festivals and religious observances continued, offering structured relief from labor. Offerings to Ceres or other local deities coincided with communal meals, music, and simple ceremonies, reinforcing social cohesion and cultural identity. Children observed closely, internalizing the links between human effort, seasonal cycles, and spiritual belief. Tales were told around fires or during communal work, stories of clever animals, heroic ancestors, moral lessons, or unusual events in neighboring villages provided entertainment while simultaneously reinforcing knowledge, values, and attentiveness to the world around them. Even seemingly ordinary stories carried layers of instruction, subtly preparing young minds to anticipate and navigate both natural and social challenges. Despite relative abundance, hazards persisted. Heat waves, sudden storms, or pest infestations tested both skill and endurance. Farmers responded with careful observation and timely interventions, shading vulnerable crops, adjusting watering, removing affected plants, or redirecting livestock to minimize damage. Even minor miscalculations could cascade, affecting both immediate yield and long-term soil health. Livestock care remained equally critical. Stress, dehydration, and disease risk increased under the summer sun, demanding constant monitoring and adaptive solutions. Experience, intuition, and attentive observation were the tools that ensured survival and prosperity. Children, increasingly capable and independent, participated actively in labor while simultaneously exploring, learning, and imagining. They carried water, guided animals, tended small plots, and experimented with early harvests, transforming practical work into layered experiences of play, learning, and responsibility. Evening socialization reinforced these lessons. Cooperative games, shared storytelling, and simple music connected labor with culture, observation, and reflection, embedding knowledge within social and familial frameworks. Evenings themselves became rich tapestries of sensory input. The air, thick with heat during the day, cooled slowly, carrying the sense of ripening crops, flowering herbs, and distant hearths. Insects filled the background with persistent hums and chirps, while nocturnal birds added occasional accents. Families gathered around fires to eat, repair tools, or reflect on the day's work, while storytelling and quiet music offered both entertainment and reinforcement of tradition. These moments were vital, not merely for rest but for cultural transmission, observation, and preparation for the next day's demands. As night deepened, the farmer's routine included careful checks of livestock, irrigation systems, and the security of harvested produce. Sleep arrived as a reward for diligence, yet it carried with it visions shaped by the day's labor. Flourishing fields, playful children, bustling markets, and the continuous interplay between human effort, animal life, and the unpredictable forces of nature. Late summer was both a time of labor's height and subtle reflection, a season that reinforced skills, resilience, and the interwoven nature of life, work, and observation, creating a continuous narrative that shaped every aspect of existence in the Roman countryside. As the relentless heat of high summer began to soften, subtle shifts in the landscape hinted at the approaching autumn, and the Roman countryside began to exhibit signs of transition, both vibrant and delicate. Crops, now heavy with ripening grains and thick pods, swayed in the warmer breezes, their movements almost rhythmic, whispering promises of harvest and reflection. The farmer's attention was split between nurturing what remained in the field and preparing for the inevitable influx of activity that would accompany the collection of mature produce. Early fruits had been enjoyed, vegetables thinned, and animals adjusted to the changing intensity of the sun, yet the work never ceased. Every moment in the field demanded careful observation, whether noting a subtle yellowing of leaves, the slight bow of wheat stalks under grain, or the movement patterns of livestock seeking shade and water. Livestock routines evolved as the days shortened and temperatures moderated. Cows grazed steadily, finding cool spots beneath scattered trees or near streams, their movements slower but more deliberate. Sheep and goats followed suit, nibbling selectively while avoiding areas where soil had become hardened or dry. Chickens and ducks moved with a different rhythm, more foraging and pecking as insects grew more active at dawn and dusk. Farmers had grown attuned to these patterns. They could predict heat, rainfall, or insect activity simply by observing the behavior of their animals. Adjustments were subtle but crucial, moving herds, shading pastures, supplementing feed, or monitoring for illness, each choice a small yet significant step toward maintaining equilibrium and ensuring future productivity. Meals reflected the evolving season, blending the last remnants of early summer with new offerings. Vegetables remained central, beans, cucumbers, onions, but were increasingly accompanied by late summer fruits, figs, and berries, their sweetness a fleeting indulgence. Dairy continued to enrich diets, and bread, freshly baked, formed the backbone of daily sustenance. Preservation techniques became more pronounced. Drying, salting, and fermenting were employed to ensure that produce could endure the months ahead. Children assisted eagerly, tasting, preparing, and learning techniques that balanced flavor, nutrition, and practical necessity. Every meal was simultaneously a lesson in observation, technique, and the rhythms of survival, weaving together the practical and the cultural. Social interactions intensified as harvest preparation began. Villagers coordinated efforts for labor, tool sharing, and early collection of ripe crops. Market trips became strategic, both for selling early produce and acquiring essential goods not locally available. News, rumors, and tales of distant towns or imperial decisions continued to inform choices, blending practical strategy with entertainment. Even casual conversations held layers of significance. A subtle warning about an upcoming storm, the latest gossip about a traveling merchant, or a story of an innovative farming technique could influence decisions across an entire village. The flow of information was continuous, requiring attention, discernment, and memory. Small festivals and communal rituals punctuated the transition from high summer to early autumn. Offerings to Ceres and other deities coincided with feasts, music, and storytelling, expressing gratitude for the season's bounty while seeking protection for the coming harvest. Children observed carefully, internalizing both cultural traditions and the practical importance of seasonal cycles. Stories were told around fires. Clever animals, heroic ancestors, moral lessons, or mysterious events in forests or neighboring villages, blending entertainment with practical guidance. These narratives reinforced observation skills, attentiveness, and cultural identity, providing context for both work and leisure. Challenges persisted, however. Shifts in weather, unexpected storms, drought, or heat could stress crops and animals, requiring rapid and informed responses. Pest infestations, subtle or sudden, demanded careful observation and adaptive measures, removing affected plants, adjusting watering, or creating rudimentary barriers. Livestock remained vulnerable, particularly to heat stress or dehydration, requiring constant vigilance. Each decision, from feeding schedules to crop protection, carried weight. Mistakes could ripple across weeks of work. Experience, intuition, and persistent observation became as vital as physical labor in maintaining balance, yield, and the subtle rhythms of rural life. Children, now seasoned participants in seasonal labor, engaged with both responsibility and play. They carried water, guided animals, tended plots, and experimented with early harvesting, blending work with observation, experimentation, and imagination. Play often mirrored adult routines, reinforcing lessons in attention, timing, and practical skill. Evening gatherings provided context for learning. Storytelling, simple music, and communal reflection connected labor, observation, and cultural transmission, embedding knowledge in social, familial, and environmental frameworks. Evenings themselves grew rich with sensory contrast. The air, cooler yet still fragrant with ripening crops, herbs, and the distant smoke of hearths, carried an array of sounds: buzzing insects, frogs near water, and the occasional nocturnal bird. Families gathered, completing final tasks, sharing meals, repairing tools, and exchanging stories that blended memory, entertainment, and instruction. Fires burned steadily in simple hearths, providing warmth, light, and focus, connecting the intense labor of the day with the subtler rhythms of culture, reflection, and preparation for the days ahead. Night brought rest, heavy yet restorative. Sleep carried dreams shaped by golden fields, thriving animals, bustling markets, and the subtle interplay between human effort, observation, and natural forces. Late summer's progression toward autumn was both a season of abundance and of preparation, a time in which labor, observation, cultural continuity, and resilience intertwined seamlessly, creating a complex and enduring rhythm that defined existence in the Roman countryside. As the days lengthened toward early autumn, the Roman countryside transformed into a mosaic of gold, green, and earthy tones, signaling the arrival of harvest and the final stretch of seasonal labor. Fields that had been nurtured through spring and summer now carried the weight of their bounty. Wheat and barley swayed under the gentle winds, legumes hung thick in pods, and vegetables reached their peak size, ripe for gathering. The farmer moved among these fields with a practiced eye, hands brushing over stalks, inspecting roots, and noting subtle variations that might indicate ripeness, disease, or potential pest damage. Timing had become everything, for a day's delay could mean lost grains, bruised fruits, or animals consuming more than they should before harvest. Harvesting required both coordination and careful strategy. Families and neighbors worked side by side, reaping crops with sickles, bundling wheat into sheaves, and gathering vegetables for immediate consumption or preservation. Early mornings saw the most intensive labor, as cooler temperatures allowed more efficient work before the sun reached its zenith. Tools were sharpened, woven baskets reinforced, and carts prepared to carry produce to storage areas or markets. Children assisted eagerly, often learning by observation first, then by careful participation, their small hands gradually acquiring dexterity and understanding of rhythm, timing, and technique essential to successful harvest. Animals played an integral role in these efforts. Oxen pulled carts laden with heavy bundles of wheat or vegetables, their pace steady and measured under the farmer's guidance. Sheep and goats grazed selectively, helping manage weeds while fertilizing the land, their movements observed for signs of stress or illness. Chickens and ducks scratched in the yard, pecking at insects disturbed by harvest activities, while also providing eggs and entertainment for the young observers who delighted in tracking their movements. Each interaction with animals was both practical and instructive, offering subtle cues about the land, weather, and upcoming needs of the farmstead. Meals reflected the intensifying season. Fresh produce was abundant, and the preparation of simple dishes, porridge, stews, breads, and cheese, was interspersed with the novelty of newly harvested fruits, sweet and tart, often enjoyed raw or preserved for winter months. Honey and herbs enhanced flavor, while preservation techniques became more urgent. Drying grains, salting vegetables, and fermenting dairy provided insurance against scarcity in colder months. Eating was not merely sustenance, but a celebration of effort, observation, and skill, a quiet acknowledgement of the delicate balance between labor and reward. Social life revolved increasingly around harvest and preparation for winter. Villagers coordinated labor and shared tools, providing mutual support as workloads intensified. Market trips were planned carefully to ensure early crops reached buyers in prime condition while essential goods not available locally were acquired. Stories and news traveled along with labor, tales of imperial edicts, weather anomalies, or clever strategies from neighboring farms informed decision-making, blending practical guidance with entertainment. Even gossip held utility, offering early warnings or opportunities, ensuring that information, observation, and memory were continuously intertwined with daily life. Festivals and rituals marked this season with particular significance. Offerings to Ceres, accompanied by songs, prayers, and communal meals, expressed gratitude for a season of labor while seeking protection for stored crops and animals. Children observed keenly, internalizing traditions and understanding that human effort, seasonal cycles, and divine favor were intertwined. Evening storytelling continued to reinforce these lessons, weaving together moral tales, local lore, and subtle observations about farming, animal behavior, and environmental cues. Each story carried both entertainment and practical guidance, shaping perception and attentiveness in ways that formal instruction could not. Despite preparation and experience, hazards remained ever-present. Sudden storms could damage crops or disrupt transport. Insect infestations threatened vegetables and grains, requiring swift, informed responses. Livestock remained sensitive to weather fluctuations and resource availability, demanding careful monitoring. Even minor mistakes could cascade, affecting weeks of preparation and labor. The farmer relied on accumulated knowledge, instinct, and careful observation to mitigate these risks, blending physical effort with strategic thinking. Children's roles expanded with the season. They participated in early harvesting, tending animals, carrying water, and assisting with preservation efforts, all while observing and imitating adult routines. Play merged with work, providing learning experiences that were both enjoyable and practical. Evening socialization continued to reinforce cultural continuity. Storytelling, shared music, and discussion of daily experiences connected labor, observation, and reflection, embedding lessons in social, familial, and environmental frameworks. Evenings were heavy with the sense of ripening crops, smoke from hearths, and the subtle coolness of approaching night. Insects chirped and hummed, frogs called from nearby water sources, and nocturnal birds added occasional notes to the rural symphony. Families gathered to share meals, complete final tasks, repair tools, and reflect on the day's labor. Fires burned steadily, offering warmth, light, and focus, while conversations, songs, and stories connected intense daily work with culture, memory, and preparation for the coming months. As night fell, The farmer's routine concluded with careful rounds, checking fences, securing livestock, ensuring harvested produce was stored safely, and observing subtle changes in weather that might affect the next day. Sleep brought rest, but dreams carried the imprint of labor, observation, and the delicate dance between human effort and the forces of nature. Early autumn was a time of both culmination and preparation, a season where the rhythm of work, attention to detail, social bonds, and cultural knowledge intersected seamlessly, creating a continuous narrative that shaped life on the Roman farm. As autumn firmly established itself in the Roman countryside, the landscape transformed into a palette of amber, gold, and russet hues, signaling both abundance and the looming necessity of preparation for the colder months. Fields were alive with activity, the weight of ripened crops bending stalks and branches, while vegetables and legumes reached their final stage of growth. The farmer, seasoned by months of observation and labor, moved through the fields with a keen eye, hands running along stalks, inspecting pods, and bending low to check roots and soil for subtle signs that might indicate readiness for harvest or potential problems lurking unseen. Timing was paramount. The slightest delay could result in spoiled grain, damaged vegetables, or weakened produce, and the pressure was palpable yet familiar, a rhythm ingrained through seasons of practice. Harvesting became an orchestrated effort of coordination, skill, and endurance. Families and neighbors worked side by side, sickles cutting through wheat and barley with precise swings, bundles tied into sheaves and stacked for transport, vegetables gathered carefully to prevent bruising, and carts loaded to capacity. Early mornings were the busiest, with cooler air allowing more efficient labor, and children participated actively, learning through observation and hands-on experience, their small hands gradually mastering the techniques that adults had honed over decades. Every task, though repetitive, carried subtle variations. The way a stalk bent under pressure, the precise angle of a sickle, or the speed at which bundles were tied, all demanded attention and adaptation. Animals were integral to this intense seasonal activity. Oxen hauled carts filled with crops, their powerful muscles guided by gentle commands and practiced touch. Sheep and goats grazed selectively, contributing to soil health and feeding on weeds while being monitored for signs of fatigue or stress. Chickens and ducks followed, pecking at disturbed insects and providing eggs to supplement meals. The farmer's relationship with these animals was both practical and deeply observational. Subtle cues, slight changes in movement, posture, or behavior, indicated environmental shifts or potential problems, requiring immediate response to prevent loss or injury. Meals during this period were abundant and reflective of the season's bounty. Fresh vegetables, fruits, grains, and dairy products filled tables, and simple dishes were enhanced with herbs, honey, and preserved ingredients. Preservation became paramount. Grains were dried and stored, vegetables salted or pickled, and dairy transformed into cheeses to sustain families through the coming months. Children assisted eagerly, learning essential skills that blended nutrition, flavor, and practicality. The act of eating was intertwined with education, observation, and preparation, reinforcing lessons about the natural world, the rhythm of seasons, and the tangible rewards of labor. Social life intensified alongside harvest activities. Villagers coordinated efforts, shared tools, and assisted one another, balancing labor with opportunity and social obligation. Markets became hubs of activity, early crops sold to eager buyers, and goods not produced locally were obtained. Stories, rumors, and practical advice circulated, informing decisions about planting, harvesting, and storage. Even casual exchanges held value, a warning about an approaching storm, news of a traveling merchant, or tips from a neighboring farm could influence strategies, making information, observation, and memory critical tools in the daily rhythm of life. Autumn festivals and rituals took on heightened significance. Offerings to Ceres and other deities marked both gratitude for abundance and prayers for protection over stored crops and livestock. Children observed and participated, internalizing the interplay of human effort, environmental cycles, and spiritual acknowledgement. Evening storytelling wove together lessons, entertainment, and subtle guidance. Tales of clever animals, heroic ancestors, moral decisions, or mysterious occurrences in neighboring villages reinforced attention, cultural identity, and practical knowledge. Stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons in observation, foresight, and survival. Challenges, however, were ever present. Early autumn storms could threaten ripened crops. Pest infestations targeted vegetables and stored grains, and livestock remained sensitive to temperature fluctuations and resource availability. Farmers needed constant vigilance, swift adaptation, and careful judgment to mitigate potential losses. Even minor mistakes, improperly stored produce, delayed harvesting, or inattentive observation, could cascade into significant setbacks, making experience, intuition, and continuous attention indispensable in sustaining productivity and resilience. Children's engagement expanded with the season's demands. They assisted with harvest, cared for animals, carried water, and helped prepare and preserve food, blending work with learning and observation. Play and labor intertwined, allowing practical knowledge to be absorbed through experience, imitation, and social interaction. Evening gatherings continued to reinforce cultural and practical continuity. Storytelling, music, and reflection connected daily work to broader social and familial frameworks, embedding knowledge, memory, and strategy into everyday life. Evenings themselves were alive with sensory detail, the scent of ripening crops, smoke from hearths, and the crisp hint of cooler air mixing with warmth of day. The chorus of insects, croaking frogs, and occasional nocturnal bird calls created a layered natural symphony. Families completed tasks, shared meals, repaired tools, and discussed events, blending work, observation, and culture into a seamless rhythm. Fires provided warmth, light, and focus, facilitating reflection, entertainment, and subtle instruction that prepared both children and adults for the months ahead. As night deepened, the farmer performed final checks, securing livestock, ensuring harvested crops were protected, observing subtle weather cues, and reflecting on the day's labor. Sleep brought rest, dreams shaped by the movement of fields, animals, markets, and human effort. Autumn was a season of culmination, preparation, and reflection, a period in which observation, labor, social bonds, and cultural practices intersected continuously, defining life on the Roman farm with complexity, richness, and enduring rhythm. As autumn deepened, the Roman countryside gradually shifted from the golden brightness of harvest to a more subdued, earthy palette, signaling both completion and preparation. Fields, now partially cleared, revealed soil enriched by fallen leaves, remaining stubble, and carefully rotated plots designed to ensure fertility for the next planting season. The farmer moved deliberately through these spaces, inspecting what had been gathered, what remained, and what required immediate attention to prevent spoilage or loss. Timing continued to dominate every decision. The storage of grains, preservation of vegetables, and care of livestock all demanded precision and constant observation. Even small oversights, slightly damp wheat, vegetables left unprotected from frost, or neglected animals, could ripple into weeks of difficulty, making vigilance a daily necessity. Harvesting slowed but did not cease entirely. Some crops required repeated attention, and animals needed continued grazing and care. Oxen hauled the last of the wheat bundles, their powerful muscles now familiar with the rhythm of carts, soil, and weight, responding almost instinctively to subtle commands. Goats and sheep grazed methodically, contributing to soil fertility while being observed for signs of fatigue or illness. Chickens and ducks remained active, pecking through fallen seeds and insects disturbed by human activity, their behaviors offering subtle indications of environmental changes or emerging hazards. The farmer's understanding of animal patterns, coupled with attentive observation of crops and soil, formed a continuous feedback loop critical to sustaining productivity and health across the farmstead. Meals reflected both the abundance and transition of the season. Fresh vegetables and fruits began to be joined by preserved foods. Salted legumes, dried herbs, and fermented dairy provided sustenance for the coming months, while simple porridges and breads remained central. Children participated actively, learning to prepare, preserve, and store food, their hands developing skill, dexterity, and a nuanced understanding of balance, timing, and flavor. Eating became both nourishment and instruction, blending practical knowledge with sensory experience, creating an ongoing dialogue between work, observation, and sustenance. Social life adapted to the slower rhythm of late autumn. Villagers coordinated storage, exchanged surplus produce, and prepared for winter scarcity. Market trips became increasingly strategic, timing sales and purchases to ensure maximum value while minimizing risk of spoilage. Stories, news, and gossip circulated through these interactions. A merchant's advice about weather, a neighboring farm's success or failure, or even a whispered tale of misfortune served as guidance for both practical decisions and social navigation. Information, observation, and memory remained intertwined, forming a network of subtle cues that informed labor, trade, and community relationships. Rituals and festivals continued to anchor the cultural and social rhythm. Offerings to Ceres and other deities expressed gratitude for the harvest and sought protection for stored goods and livestock. Children observed carefully, internalizing the connections between human effort, environmental cycles, and divine oversight. Evening storytelling continued, weaving moral lessons, practical guidance, and local lore into narratives that reinforced attention, cultural identity, and adaptive thinking. Stories were embedded with subtle instructions: which plants ripen first, how animals behave under stress, or how to anticipate weather changes, making entertainment inseparable from survival and observation. Challenges intensified as autumn progressed. Early frosts, sudden storms, or pest infestations threatened stored crops and remaining vegetables, requiring swift and informed responses. Livestock needed careful monitoring, with feed adjusted, water sources maintained, and shelter prepared for colder nights. Minor mistakes, overlooking damp grains, neglecting shelter, or misjudging frost timing, could cascade into weeks of difficulty, highlighting the importance of accumulated experience, attentiveness, and intuition. Each day presented a delicate balancing act, where observation, labor, and foresight intertwined seamlessly to sustain the farmstead. Children's roles expanded further, merging work with observation, play, and learning. They assisted with the final harvest, tended animals, carried water, and helped prepare stores for winter, their involvement both practical and instructive. Play often mimicked adult routines, blending entertainment with observation, practice, and subtle skill development. Evening gatherings reinforced these lessons. Storytelling, music, and communal reflection connected labor with culture, memory, and planning, embedding knowledge in social and familial frameworks. Evenings in late autumn carried a distinct atmosphere: cooler air, earthy sense of soil and fallen leaves, smoke from hearths, and the gentle sound of animals settling for the night. Insects and frogs provided subtle background noise, while occasional nocturnal birds punctuated the night. Families completed tasks, shared meals, repaired tools, and reflected on the day's work. Fires provided warmth, light, and focus, enabling discussions, stories, and reflection that bridged the intensity of labor with cultural practice, observation, and preparation for the coming months. As night fell, the farmer completed final rounds, checking livestock, securing stored produce, and observing weather cues that might indicate frost or rain. Sleep was restorative yet carried dreams shaped by months of labor, observation, and subtle interactions with crops, animals, and the environment. Late autumn was a season of reflection, preparation, and anticipation, a period where attention to detail, social bonds, cultural practice, and environmental observation intertwined, maintaining continuity and resilience on the Roman farm.